Welcome, ladies and gents, to the last section of your Development in Africa module. How exciting! So we're right at the end of the module booklet because, guess what, we're right at the end of the module. So page 55. I've no idea how long this will take me to explain. It might take 2 videos, it might not. We'll see how we get on. Okay, so what we're supposed to finish with on this module is where does sub-Saharan Africa go from here? What are people doing? What should they do in the future? It's where do we go from here? Okay, and there are quite a few things that we're going to work through. I am going to explain aid, microfinance, the World Bank, the IMF briefly, debt cancellation, the MDGs and the SDGs. So I think it probably will be 2 videos. The other things we have sort of already talked about within the module already, and you might come up with some of your own opinions because this is human geography and there's more than one possible answer. But also, this is about the future, so nobody really knows what is exactly the best thing to do. So very definitely something that you can say, well, this could be sensible, but so could this or whatever. Okay, without further ado then, let's work our way through the list. Aid. Now I'm not going to show you that video, but what that video does is it's got some real world examples, I suppose, of all the different types of aid, because that's quite confusing. They're listed on page 55 in capital letters with a little definition, but it might be that that video clip just helps you slightly. So aid is a very big term. It's a transfer of resources from a donor to a recipient. So if you have ever given money to, say, Comic Relief or something like that, then they will probably use that money to give aid to somebody. Okay, but let's talk about the types. Bilateral. So bilateral would be aid given from, say, the British government to the Kenyan government. In this context, BI, by, means two. Alright, so one government giving money or something to another government is bilateral aid. Multilateral aid, multi meaning many. If lots and lots of people give money to Oxfam, you can see the little goat with the Oxfam logo around his neck, and then Oxfam spend that money in lots and lots of different countries, that's a good example of multilateral. NGOs, we've talked about in year 1. NGOs are non-governmental organisations, and Oxfam is probably the best known example. The trouble with bilateral aid, and you can see a good example of bilateral aid here, clearly from the American government, it's very political. And let's say there was some kind of humanitarian crisis in a country who had fallen out with another country, it might be that they don't get very much help at all. Whereas multilateral, from an NGO, the whole emphasis is on non-governmental, so politics just doesn't get involved. All right, so often multilateral avoids the politics. Short-term, long-term. Short-term aid, we've kind of talked about in the tectonics module, in the climate module. If you have some awful earthquake, massive volcanic eruption, hurricane, you need short-term aid, aid that is going to get people back on their feet. In this module, we're really talking about long-term development aid. How do you help that country to move forwards? All right, so short-term aid definitely has a place, but in this module, long-term development aid is the crucial one. And then top-down, bottom-up. We've talked about those in year 1. We talked about them with urban rebranding and gentrification. So urban rebranding is a top-down process because it's done by the council, the government, big companies. Gentrification is a bottom-up process because it's done by ordinary people. Now, we've already established that unfortunately in sub-Saharan Africa you can have quite a lot of corruption within governments. So in this continent, bottom-up aid is often regarded to be better because you're working directly with the people, which hopefully should avoid corruption and money being siphoned off, etc., etc. So step number 1 is to get your head around the different types. Okay, page 55, maybe the video clip, etc. You can be proud to be British, maybe prouder to be Norwegian here, but this just shows you that some countries are better at giving international aid than others. We are pretty good. Not all countries, as you can see, manage to do that. And this just gives you a sense of countries we give money to. You've got the 2014 figures on page 55. You can see quite a few sub-Saharan African countries mentioned. That's 2016. Notice it changes every year depending on what the political situation is, etc., etc. Okay, that's just an example of some NGOs. Now, opinions. Aid is good. So you are very much entitled to the opinion that you think the best way forward for sub-Saharan Africa is for us to provide as much aid as possible to get them on their feet, and then they'll be off and running. And basically those hyperlinks would be good evidence or proof of that point of view. And many people in the world believe that aid is fantastic. In fact, they would say it's essential because, as we've established repeatedly in this module, there are many problems facing sub-Saharan African countries, and actually some help from NGOs and other countries is probably quite important. But there's always a but, isn't there, in geography? There's always a catch. Here's one theory. So if you decide to argue that you don't think aid is the best way forward, this quote's quite a good one. Give a man a fish and you feed him for a day. Teach a man to fish and you feed him for a lifetime. I won't get started on the gender inequality there. That's an issue for another day. But anyway, you get the idea. We would probably be better to focus on helping African countries become independent rather than them being reliant on us. If we just keep giving food and giving stuff, it doesn't make you stand on your own 2 feet. So for example, I don't know the setup that you have in your personal life, but those of you who know how to do a bit of cooking, can do your laundry, make your bed and kind of look after yourselves to a certain extent, are going to find independence much easier than people that get everything done for them. It's that basic principle. Oh, there's also a very well-educated African lady called Dambisa Moyo, who argues very powerfully, I suppose is the best adjective, that we should stop giving aid to Africa completely. Now, she's African and super educated. She knows what she's talking about. So if you decide that you think aid is a waste of time and money, definitely watch that clip. Now, even if you decide that you like aid, I would like you, please, to know a little bit about this. This is tied aid. Tied aid is aid with conditions. Now, theoretically, those conditions could be amazing, couldn't they? Like you could say, I'm going to give you £1 million, DR Congo, but there is absolutely no way that you must use it to line your own pockets, rig elections, You could give aid with a really good set of conditions. Often, tied aid comes with ridiculous conditions, all right? And I've just put one example up on the screen about American food aid, but I could give you much worse ones. For example, the British government has given a lot of aid to Sierra Leone, but I think it's, if you go back to the 80s or maybe the 90s, the British government gave Sierra Leone money on the condition that they spent it buying weapons for the Civil War. Well, that's not going to help your development very much, is it? All right, so even if you decide that aid is generally a good thing, tied aid can be disastrous. And yeah, by all means, you can find a specific example. There's quite a few to choose from. Here's an interesting synoptic link that you could use with regard to that. EU, bit controversial to mention, but there we are. There's a trade aid deal that we have with some sub-Saharan African countries. So we are allowed to fish in their fishing grounds in return for giving them aid. Is that fair? How do we feel about that? We've already said previously that other countries stealing fish from African fishing grounds does seem to have significant links to piracy. Is it fair? Like, how much fish do we take out of those waters? Do we get more fish than we give them money? Is it in any way a fair deal? There's a few dodgy deals going on with aid, is what I'm trying to say. Okay, if you give it to the people at the top, what are they going to spend it on? Gold-plated toilets, crystal-encrusted Mercedes? Are they going to use it to develop the country? Don't know. So I'm already noticing that clearly this first video is only going to cover aid. Sorry about that. DR Congo. Look at the quality of the road network, ladies and gents. So DFID, which is the Department for International Development, that's part of the British government. You can be slightly proud to be British here. DFID created a major programme of road creation in DR Congo, and so that would be an example of bilateral, but that is long-term development aid, because if you have a good road network, you can access healthcare and education, you can trade more effectively and all sorts of things. And I've included a couple of hyperlinks to what DFID and Oxfam are doing in DRC. Kenya, there's quite a lot of aid going on in Kenya. There's a lot of aid work going on in all of our 5 countries, but I'd say that DRC and Kenya make quite a nice link there. So yes, okay, so I'm going to just do this first video on aid and I'm going to sum up. It will probably take you a little bit of time to get to know the phrases, to check out some case studies, etc, etc, but this is my personal summary, all right? Aid can, and I'd really like to emphasise that word, aid can be good. I'd say, this is my opinion, I would say that multilateral, NGO-based, so giving money to an organisation like Christian Aid or Oxfam or the Red Cross or whatever, is good because it takes the politics out of it. It needs to be long-term and it needs to be bottom-up, because then if you're working with people, you are going to not lose so much money, hopefully, to corruption and ineffective use and bureaucracy and all of that stuff. So I think that type of aid is brilliant. I think we have to acknowledge that we will need short-term aid. That will always be essential after natural disasters. So there's always a place for short-term aid. But some types of aid probably cause more harm than good. Tide aid, if you've got ridiculous conditions, or if you give the government money and then they spend it on building a nice new government headquarters and don't do anything to develop the country, well, that's not great, is it? And sometimes bilateral aid can be disastrous. All right, so as you can see, even in this final section, which is kind of like, right, how can we move forward with sub-Saharan Africa? It's still not a kind of smooth, easy process, is it? Which is a shame, but I suppose in a certain way inevitable. Okay, so we will carry on with this lesson. We might need 2 or 3 videos.